Hey, welcome to the Soccer Specialist YouTube channel. I appreciate you checking this out. I wanted to give you a quick intro before digging into the podcast, just so you know, I've been doing a podcast for a few years on Spotify. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Google, so forth, audio only podcasts. And I realize there's probably a lot of people who check out YouTube and don't listen to traditional podcast platforms. And YouTube also now has a podcast category for uploading. So I wanted to start uploading some of my podcasts onto YouTube. The information, you may hear some weird things depending on the date, like I might mention the World Cup or something, which isn't happening now, but the content itself is what I call evergreen. It's stuff that applies to you as a youth soccer player that can help you out, now or whether it was 6 months ago or a year ago. And so it's valuable information. It's not dated information, even though the podcast might have been, 6 months ago. So hopefully you would enjoy this. If you do, please give it a like or subscribe. It really, really helps out the channel, and I do appreciate it. And let's dig in.
Here we go. Welcome once again to another episode of the Soccer Specialist Podcast. Hey, welcome. And today I want to talk about the topic of making mistakes in soccer and how that relates to not only development in general, but one of the things I think we're really, really lacking in American soccer, and that is decision making and specifically creativity. First, coaches, and parents, please, 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 please constantly encourage your players to make mistakes. They need to be trying new things in practice all the time, every practice. They will not get better if they're afraid to make mistakes. Praise a mistake when it happens if they're trying to do something new or do something creative. Don't punish it. It is amazing to me how difficult it is to get kids to try something new, whether it's a simple 1v1 move such as a scissor or a heel pass or whatever it may be. And the reaction is always the same. They're afraid to make a mistake. Well, why, unless we as the adults have taught them to be afraid to make a mistake? How can we expect our players to improve their decision making, to improve their creativity? Two of the most important things in being a successful soccer player, a successful soccer team. How can we expect them to be dynamic and be creative if we don't give them an environment of freedom and support and encouragement with that creativity, instead of making them one touch robots that are very, very predictable, who play exactly where they're facing and make we go up and down the field in a very specific way because the coaches are saying do this, do this, do that, 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's no room for anything else. They can't be great if they don't make mistakes and mess up a lot first. It has to be done, right? How's a player ever going to pull off a double step over or a cool little heel pass in a game if we don't even give them the freedom and support to know it's okay to mess it up? They have to understand that, and that has to come from us as coaches and parents. And I get it. Okay, I understand. I can go back to my current high school age girls, back to when they were 7 years old, and I can still remember the first time. We played a 8v8 at the time, and so we played a 3-3-1. I can remember the first time my left back made a great play out wide, didn't have anywhere to go up the line, so she turned back and played a backwards diagonal ball into the middle to my center back, right in front of the goal. Something that absolutely terrifies all the adults with young kids. Don't play it in the middle. But it was the correct thing to do. It was the right pass. Luckily, it worked. And I say luckily is because as much as it was going through my head at the time that it was the right play and that we're going to have to give up goals doing things like that for them to learn and to understand what is correct, I cannot honestly say that I might not have screamed, "Don't play it in the middle," if that pass had not worked out and the other team got it and scored. And that's the problem. We as adults need to work on that. Parents, you need to support the coaches in this. Stop screaming, "Kick the ball, get it away," and all that other stuff that takes away from what the kids are trying to do. I mean, if every time they get the ball and they're in trouble, you're screaming, "Kick it away," they're never going to do anything creative, are they? And so just because a mistake might look awful in the moment, it's a moment. It's a moment on a long road. It doesn't mean it's not a great thing for the player's long-term development to realize I tried something, it didn't work, the world didn't end. Okay? I can work on it in practice and eventually be able to do it in a game. We are supposed to be developing great players, right? The idea of development, if you're talking about an actual career path in soccer and talking about playing in college and maybe playing in the pros and playing in the national team that can eventually compete for a World Cup, right? We need to develop those great players. It's not the same thing as developing a great youth team for winning at a young age. And so we need to develop creative, risk taking players that are unpredictable, that are willing to try new things, that have a comfort on the ball, not boring, predictable, one touch passers who can't do anything with the ball if they're forced to take more than a couple touches. I saw this in high school recently with one of my girls who my most creative, dynamic 1v1 player. Watching her on our high school team getting screamed at every time she took more than 2 touches to get rid of the ball. It's ridiculous. How about Spain in the World Cup and their loss to Russia? Spain, yes, Spain's a world class team. Possession, it's great. They didn't have anybody who could break down Russia's disciplined defense. All they could do was pass back and around, back and around. They had no 1v1 player that could challenge Russia with the ball, beat a player, and have Russia need to play 2 and 3 players to the ball, which then opens up spaces for other teams. And now you're truly attacking. Russia did not get out of their block because Spain could not force them to do so off the dribble. They had no creative 1v1 player. Americans don't have that. We've never had a true creative 1v1 player. And that's not a knock on your Landon Donovans or your Clint Dempseys. They're fantastic players. Clint's pretty creative. He's willing to try anything. So maybe we've had one, but not truly world class. Not the type of player you're talking about that's going to lead a national team deep into a World Cup. And you never will if the players are afraid to make mistakes when they're 9, 10, 11 years old. They're never going to develop the creativity they need. They're never going to develop the decision making they need if we don't allow them to be creative, if we don't allow them to make mistakes, if we don't allow them to play games and make their own decisions. Yes, we have to teach them the concepts, we have to teach them the principles, but we have to get away from the pass has to go from this player to that player to that player in a specific order, in a specific place on the field, because that's how we do it. We've got to stop doing that. We've got to stop calling 1v1 players selfish ball hoggers, because that's not necessarily the case. We need them to develop those skills. Then we can take that and explain and teach how you can be a good 1v1 player that helps the entire team. When a 1v1 player can beat 1 or 2 players off the dribble, it doesn't mean they're always dribbling the goal and shooting. You've now created chaos amongst that defense. You've broken them down. They can't be disciplined because they have to send players to the ball. That opens up spaces for runs for other players to make. Go to YouTube, check out some of the passes Messi has made in his career. Unbelievable. Okay, so we've got to get away from what we've done to these kids. We've conditioned them to fear mistakes. We've got to encourage them to play on their own. There's where you're going to get some creativity. Get the kids out knocking the ball around with each other, playing 1v1, playing 2v2, without adults, without coaches. Coaches, encourage your players to make a move with the ball. Now, this specifically 1v1, but if you can get them to start trying moves in 1v1, that can carry over into all their other decision making and all their other creativity. Force them, say, look, when you get a ball, whatever you're doing, have some time with small sided games, 2v2, 3v3, and say, hey, when you get the ball, you must make some type of 1v1 move. Scissors, step over. You can even just give them a couple, okay? Scissors, step over, lunge fake, Cruyff if they're old enough and skilled enough to do it. Whatever it is, say they can't get rid of the ball till they do. So they're also going to work on shielding, keeping control of the ball in tight space is also important. One thing, this is a quote from Morgan Andrews, and someone sent this to me. I can't remember who, but it was, the thing about soccer is that it's a creative sport. You don't have to stick to one play. You don't have to stick to passing it to one person. You can do what you want with the ball and do what you want with your passes. That's why I fell in love with it. I fell in love with the creativity. So very true. Soccer is the ultimate team sport that is a player sport, right? You have halftime. That's it. You have no timeout. You have no stoppages. The rare times when you ask for 10 yards or there's an injury, you get a second whistle. But free kicks, throw-ins, whatever it is, the game never stops. So it's all about the players. Okay. Even again in the simple act of, I'll wrap it up with this, in the simple act of beating a player 1v1, endless number of ways to manipulate the ball, right? Move the defender and blow by them. Players aren't going to do that if they're afraid to make mistakes or are constantly told to get rid of the ball or they're yelled at for being a ball hog when they try and beat a player 1v1. Okay, so hopefully you take something of this with it. Parents listening, get your kid out in the yard, getting touches on the ball, just manipulating the ball with all parts of their feet so they can get comfortable with it. In America, I think that the story I use for parents and coaches to understand this, that we need to get our kids doing is, the great basketball players, your Magic Johnsons and so forth. You always hear that story about when they were growing up, they were dribbling the ball everywhere, right? Always bouncing the basketball, always had the basketball with them. That in itself didn't make him a great player, but it got him very, very comfortable with the ball. So they weren't worrying about their dribbling when they were out on the court, right? Their head was up. They were able to develop their vision and see things because they had a comfort level with the ball. And that's what we need to get with our soccer players too, because then moves just happen. On the female side in America, watch Tobin Heath. Incredibly fun player to watch. She's incredibly creative with the ball. She's also very comfortable with the ball on her feet. Not a selfish player, but she's going to get wide. She's going to challenge players 1v1. You'll see another defender come over and have to worry about being in a support position even a little closer than normal. And that opens things up for teammates. Okay. So please, in closing, in case you haven't gotten it yet, encourage your creativity in your players. Allow them to try new things. It's the only way, making mistakes, it's the only way they're going to get better. Oh, before I forget, one thing I did want to add, because someone had actually brought this up to me. They were all upset that I said to encourage mistakes. We should never encourage mistakes. Obviously, I don't mean it that way. Maybe a more accurate way of saying it is encourage them to try new things and let them know that it's okay to make a mistake. The only way they're going to get better is by making mistakes. Nobody does anything the first time perfectly when they're trying something new. So let them know that there aren't going to be negative consequences when they go and try and scissor in practice for the first time or what have you. And that wraps it up for this podcast of the Soccer Specialist. Um, Please check out all our podcasts on thesoccerspecialist.com/podcasts. You can subscribe there, listen to other episodes. Also, there's a for your player, or if your players are listening, for you can grab a copy of some foot skill videos that I put together and workouts that you could do to improve your ball control. And that wraps it up for this issue of the Soccer Specialist podcast. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.